You know what they're doing. You've read the articles, you've watched the videos, you've had the conversations with friends who all said the same thing. You need to leave, you need to set boundaries, you need to stop letting them do this to you. And yet here you are, again, somehow back in the same conversation, feeling the same confusion, wondering how you ended up apologizing for something they did. This is the question nobody fully answers. It's not what narcissists do that keeps people trapped. It's why it works at a psychological and neurological level so deep that knowing about it intellectually doesn't protect you from it. Today we're going to go there, not the surface, the architecture underneath, because understanding why this keeps happening to you is the only thing that will actually give you a way out. Important note. This video is for educational purposes and uses the term narcissist in a broad psychological sense to describe a pattern of manipulative behavior. Full narcissistic personality disorder can only be diagnosed by a licensed mental health professional. If you recognize your situation here, please consider reaching out to a therapist experienced in relational trauma and coercive control. This video is information. A professional is support. You deserve both. Part 1. The fundamental misunderstanding that keeps you stuck. Most people approach narcissistic manipulation as if it were a strategy the narcissist is consciously choosing, as if they wake up each morning with a plan. Today I will gaslight. Today I will guilt trip. Today I will undermine. That framing, while understandable, is the first thing that needs to go, because it leads you to believe that if you could just expose the strategy, the manipulation would stop working. It won't, and here's why. Narcissistic manipulation is not primarily a strategy, it is a survival system. It emerges from a psychological architecture built, usually in early childhood, around a core wound so unbearable that the entire personality reorganized itself to never feel it directly again. That wound, at its most fundamental, is this: I am not enough as I am. My real self is defective. If people truly saw me, they would leave. Everything, every behavior, every tactic, every manipulation flows from the compulsive management of that wound. The narcissist doesn't manipulate you because they calculated it would work. They manipulate you because their psyche requires a constant external supply of validation, control, and superiority to function. Without it, they face the one thing their entire personality is constructed to avoid: the full weight of their own internal emptiness. This is why understanding narcissism purely as cruelty misses something important. It is cruelty, yes, it causes real damage to you, to everyone who gets close, but it is cruelty that originates in a particular kind of psychological desperation. Understanding that doesn't mean excusing it. It means understanding why it never stops, because the need that drives it never goes away. Part 2. The Idealization Trap. Why your brain got hooked before you had a chance. Before we talk about why the manipulation keeps working, we need to go back to the beginning, because the reason you're still susceptible has a lot to do with what happened before the manipulation started. There was a version of this person, early on, who felt extraordinary. The attention was intense in a way you hadn't experienced before. They seemed to understand you profoundly, almost immediately. They reflected back an image of you that was slightly better than the one you carried, more interesting, more beautiful, more worthy of deep love and fascination. The relationship moved fast because it felt undeniably real. This is what clinicians call idealization, and in narcissistic relationships, it is not accidental romantic intensity. It is the first phase of a cycle, and it is functionally a form of grooming. What was happening in your brain during that period was neurochemically identical to addiction. The combination of intense attention, validation, perceived deep connection, and intermittent unpredictability triggers dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin in patterns that create profound attachment and profound vulnerability. Your nervous system bonded to this person during a period of manufactured intensity, and that bond, formed at a neurological level in the emotional memory systems of the brain, does not dissolve simply because your rational mind later updates its assessment of who this person actually is. This is why you can know everything and still feel pulled back, because the part of your brain that knows is not the same part of your brain that is attached, and they are not having the same conversation. Part 3: The devaluation cycle, and why your brain keeps trying to get back to the beginning. Here is the mechanism that sits at the heart of everything. After idealization comes devaluation, the gradual and then accelerating withdrawal of everything that made the beginning feel so extraordinary. The criticism begins. The warmth becomes conditional. The person who once made you feel like the most seen human on earth now regularly makes you feel like a source of disappointment. And here, right here, is where the trap locks shut. Your brain, which bonded to the idealized version of this person, interprets the devaluation not as a revelation of who they really are, but as a problem to solve, a puzzle, a temporary malfunction in something that was once wonderful. The psychological term for this is intermittent reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms known to science. When reward is consistent, the brain habituates to it. When reward is intermittent, when warmth and coldness alternate unpredictably, the brain becomes obsessed with it. The dopamine system fires not when the reward arrives, but in anticipation of it, in the pursuit of it. This is why the good moments in a narcissistic relationship often feel more intense, more precious, more electrifying than equivalent moments in a healthy relationship would, because your brain has been conditioned to treat them as rare, uncertain, and therefore extraordinarily valuable. You are not chasing the person in front of you, you are chasing the feeling of the beginning, and your brain has been trained to believe that if you can just say the right thing, be the right version of yourself, avoid the wrong triggers, you can get back there. You cannot, but the trying keeps you in. Part 4: Why they always know exactly where to press. By now, you may have noticed something that feels almost supernatural about the narcissist in your life: their seemingly unerring ability to find the exact point of pressure that works on you. The specific insecurity, the particular fear, the wound from your past that, when touched, makes you suddenly manageable in a way that nothing else does. This is not supernatural. It is the natural result of what happens when a person with an acute need for control spends sustained time with you during your most vulnerable and open phase. During idealization, you told them everything. You shared the fears you'd never said out loud, the wounds from childhood, the ways you've always felt not quite enough, the things you most needed to hear. This is what intimacy looks like, and in a healthy relationship, that information is held with care. In a narcissistic relationship, that information is filed, not consciously perhaps, but the narcissistic psyche, which is perpetually scanning for leverage, for ways to manage the external world to protect the internal void, absorbs this knowledge and retains it with precision. And when control is needed, when you start to pull away, when you start to push back, it surfaces. You're doing exactly what your mother always said you would do. I knew you'd react this way. You've always had this problem. No wonder your last relationship failed. This is not someone who knows you deeply and is sharing that knowledge honestly. This is someone using the map of your psyche to navigate back to control. The intimacy was real. The use of it is predatory. Part 5: The shame inversion. How they make their behavior your problem. This is perhaps the most psychologically elegant and most damaging of all narcissistic manipulation mechanisms, and it is the one that keeps people trapped the longest. Here is what you need to understand about narcissistic shame. It doesn't function the way shame functions in most people. In a psychologically typical person, shame, though painful, is ultimately about the self. It motivates repair, apology, change, accountability. In a narcissistic structure, shame is existentially intolerable. The entire personality is organized around never fully experiencing it, and so when something occurs that would, in a healthy person, produce shame, a mistake, a failure, a moment of cruelty that is called out, the narcissistic psyche does something extraordinary. It transfers the shame outward onto the nearest available person. This is why conversations that begin with you raising something legitimate, something they did, something you need, somehow end with you feeling like you are the problem, not because the argument was won fairly, but because the narcissist's psyche is operating under a compulsion, a genuine psychological compulsion, to evacuate the shame before it can land. I only acted that way because of how you spoke to me. You always bring things up at the worst time. If you weren't so sensitive, we wouldn't have these conversations. You're the one with the anger problem. Look at how you're acting right now. And here is the devastating part. You absorb it because you are a person with empathy, because you are capable of self-reflection, because the possibility that you might be contributing to the problem feels, to someone with a conscience, worth taking seriously. Your capacity for self-examination is the precise psychological quality being weaponized against you. The narcissist doesn't have it, or has it in such limited supply that it isn't available under pressure. You have it in abundance, and they have learned, again, not always consciously, that it makes you reliably willing to pick up the shame they cannot hold. Part 6. Why you can't seem to stop it, even when you see it. This is the question people ask most and feel most ashamed of asking. Why can't I just stop letting it affect me? Why does it keep working even when I know what's happening? There are several layers to this answer. The first is neurological. As we discussed, the bond formed during idealization is encoded in emotional memory systems that do not update as quickly as rational understanding does. Your thinking brain can know the full truth of the situation. Your nervous system is still responding to the person who made you feel extraordinary at the beginning. These two systems are running simultaneously, and they are not in agreement. The second is trauma response. Extended exposure to unpredictable emotional environments, warmth and coldness cycling without clear logic, produces nervous system responses that are now well documented in the research on relational trauma. Hypervigilance, fawning, compulsive people-pleasing, difficulty maintaining boundaries under emotional pressure. These are not personality flaws, they are adaptations. Your nervous system learned to manage this environment the best way it could, and those adaptations now operate automatically. The third is identity erosion. One of the most consistent long-term effects of narcissistic relationships is the gradual hollowing out of the target's sense of self. When your reality is repeatedly questioned, when your perceptions are consistently reframed, when your strengths are subtly undermined over time, the internal compass that would otherwise tell you this is wrong, I deserve better, becomes harder and harder to hear. The manipulation keeps working partly because it has progressively dismantled the psychological infrastructure you would need to resist it. And the fourth, the one people find hardest to accept, is love. Real love, or something close enough to it that the distinction feels meaningless from the inside. You loved a version of this person, perhaps a version that was partly constructed, partly a performance, but also, perhaps, a version that contained something real. Grief is appropriate here. You are not foolish for having loved. You are human. Part 7. What actually helps and what doesn't. What actually helps is different, and it begins internally. Reconnect with your own perception, deliberately. Start keeping a private record of events as they actually occurred, before the reframe arrives. This is not about building a legal case. It is about maintaining contact with your own experience of reality before it gets revised. Individual therapy, specifically with someone who understands narcissistic and coercive relationship dynamics. This is not optional if you want to recover the internal compass. A skilled therapist can help you identify which thoughts and beliefs are yours and which ones were installed. That distinction is foundational. Gradually rebuild the parts of your life that contracted. Friendships, interests, professional identity. Not all at once, but consistently. Every part of yourself that exists independently of the narcissist is a part of yourself they cannot reach. Understand that you cannot fix, heal, love, or out-argue someone out of a narcissistic structure. The wound that drives this behavior is real, and it is deep, and it was formed long before you arrived. You did not cause it, you cannot cure it, and staying in the belief that you can is itself part of the trap. Here is the thing about narcissistic manipulation that nobody says clearly enough. It keeps working, not because you are weak, not because you are stupid, not because you somehow deserve it or chose it in any meaningful sense. And here is my question for the comments this week. What was the moment, the specific, particular moment, when something shifted inside you and you thought, this isn't love anymore, this is something else, and what did you do with that thought? You don't have to share, but if you're ready, you might write exactly the words that someone else has been waiting to read. Oh,